So PubMed. Anyone else?
Hey,
Okay.
this is
There are
Ramesh Chuba.
so.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, pardon me.
Hey, I am guilty of often using Google Scholar because it's just so easy to use, but it's not as rich um, in its like search refinement.
Yeah. Well, that is. And who was that? Was that Ryan?
Yeah, that's me. Hi.
Okay, great. Just I can It's hard. It's harder to see who's speaking. Yeah. Well, I would say don't feel guilty about anything you're using. It's not about whether something shouldn't be used or should be used. It's more using a tool for what it's worth. What's the value in the tool? And I use Google Scholar all the time, because we have these interdisciplinary topics and we don't know where to go. And Google Scholar is a great place to go to grab some relevant items, and then you can go into PubMed and do a more structured search. So it's not that you shouldn't use Google Scholar, it's more you can use it as a jumping off point as opposed to an end point. Thank you. It's always interesting to hear what people are using. Um, so let's oh, so let's talk a bit what I mean by an advanced search. So with an advanced search, you're really being intentional about your entire process. You're being systematic and you're being structured at every point along the way. So you're being systematic and structured in identifying your information need, searching and retrieving information, and systematic in the way you evaluate and manage the results. So I'll talk about the hallmarks of a systematic and structured approach in a moment, but just wanted to get this definition out there. And I do want to say that systematic and structured methodologies, they fall along a spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, you have a narrative review. You're doing a basic literature review. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have, a formal systematic review that has laid out guidelines for how you conduct those searches and manage the results and every decision along the way. But all reviews, no matter what you're working on, can be systematic in approach, even if you're not choosing a formal systematic review methodology. So let's talk a bit what we mean by a systematic approach, and that's systematic methodology, systematic review methodology. So I'll go through each one in turn in the following slides. One would be working with a team. One would be transparency in methodology and presentation. Another attribute of a systematic approach is search comprehensiveness. Another attribute is predefined inclusion and exclusion criteria. And finally, you would need quality assessment. So let's talk about the first attribute of a systematic review methodology. So the first would be working with a team. So when you are performing a formal systematic review, you've chosen that methodology because you want to be as systematic as possible. You need to have a team because everything about being systematic is to reduce bias in the process. So establishing a team with different types of expertise is important. Often people will come to me and say, I'm working on a systematic review. And I say, that's great. And the first question that I ask is, how many people on your team? And sometimes people will say, well, it's only me. Well, then I work with them to find a different methodology that would match their needs, because you really need a team. So you need a minimum of 2 people, and everyone on the team is responsible for the final manuscript, no matter what you're working on as part of that project. Another attribute of a formal systematic review methodology is that you need complete transparency in methodology and presentation. So you need to be explicit every part of the way. So what your search process was, how you extracted data, how you presented the results. Anyone reading your document, your final manuscript, if you are doing a formal systematic review, should be able to understand how you completed your process. And you do that so that people can replicate your work. And I have a few places here where you can go to understand transparency. For example, you could look at protocols. The Prospero database is a database of registered protocols for systematic reviews. You could look at other systematic reviews, for example, in the Cochrane Library, where you can see the level of transparency that those published reviews have about their methodology. And if you're interested in being completely transparent, you can look at the PRISMA guidelines, which provide ways for reporting out and being transparent in your reviews. And again, you can use those guidelines even if you're not conducting a formal systematic review. Another attribute of a systematic review is that you would want search comprehensiveness. So if you are conducting a formal systematic review, you're basically telling everyone, I have found every study on this topic. So if that is not something that matches the needs of your project, then you don't have to do a formal systematic review, but you can still be systematic in approach. So you're looking for complete comprehensiveness. You're looking to search multiple databases in order to achieve that, because even though there's overlap, there, each database does have content that differs slightly. The coverage is different. You would want to do some searching of grade literature, so content that is produced by research institutes and think tanks and other organizations that isn't in the peer-reviewed literature. And you would also want to do some hand searching, maybe looking at tables of contents of journals of interest, looking at reference lists, doing citation tracking, which I'll get to a little later. Okay, so another attribute of a formal systematic review is that you want to decide before you do your review what types of content you're going to include and not include. So they're predefined inclusion and exclusion criteria. And this reduces bias so that it prevents you from downloading your results and then deciding along the way what you're going to include and not include. So you're setting up rules for what you're going to include. So that is another hallmark of a systematic approach. And finally, another hallmark of a systematic review is that you assess the quality of the studies that get included in your review. So you critically examine each study's methodology and findings. And there are different tools that can help you with the process. And I have a couple listed here, but there are many of them. So that is a quick overview of what the attributes are of being systematic in approach. So if you were choosing to do a formal systematic review, you would need to meet all of the criteria that I just mentioned. So there's a lot to think about when you're choosing a literature review methodology. One of the things to think about is you really want your project purpose to drive the methodology you choose. You don't have to conduct a systematic review in order to take a systematic approach. I often get, and not just me, many of my colleagues and I in the library get a lot of questions where people start out wanting to do a systematic review or thinking that's the right match, but it doesn't necessarily match the needs of the project. So you don't have to conduct a systematic review to take a systematic approach. However, the more systematic you are in your approach, the more robust your project. So even if you're doing a narrative review and you're not intending to be 100% comprehensive, for example, you can still take elements of being systematic in approach and include them in your methodology. There are lots of different kinds of reviews. This article is interesting to look at if you want to know more. This article did a review of reviews and looked at looked at published typologies, and they grouped the review types into families of reviews, and they came up with 48 different review types. So what I always tell people is the most important thing is to be transparent in your process. There's no one perfect review type. You want to think about the needs of your project. So for example, if you want to determine the extent of research on a particular topic, something more broad, that might be a good match for a scoping review. If you're looking for literature for a grant proposal, then conducting a formal systematic review, which could take 18 to 24 months, it wouldn't really be a good match. There are other types of reviews you can work on and other ways of gathering content. Maybe you want to do a review on a health services research topic, but you want to get the evidence to policymakers quickly. Then there's something called a rapid review, where you are taking all the elements of a systematic review, but making very intentional abbreviations of that methodology. So there are lots of different types of reviews, and you want to think about your project. So I want to launch into now about constructing searches. And I'm wondering, before I go on, if anyone has any questions. Okay, so I will go on. So we've talked big picture about the different attributes of, what would be required of a formal systematic review. And we've talked about that you can still be systematic in approach. And one of the ways to be systematic in approach is to conduct a structured search. So let's talk about that process. So the first part of the process is to conduct exploratory searches. And you conduct these exploratory searches for a number of reasons. First, you want to see if others have conducted a review on your topic. You don't want to do necessarily exactly something that someone has done. Maybe you want a different take on what they've done, but you want to know what is out there, what's already published. Another reason you do these exploratory searches is that you want to gain an understanding of the amount of literature related to your question. So you want to just get a sense of whether you're going to be flooded with results or whether there isn't that much out there. You also want to, with these exploratory searches, what I like to say is harvest terminology. You want to use these exploratory searches to find related terms that you can use. And you also want to do these exploratory searches to identify search strategies that you could tweak, and you can cite where you got the search from. What I would say is the time you spend in these exploratory searches will pay off and will help prepare you for your structured search that you will create. I think there's a myth that we sit down, we put in our terms, we get what we need, but it takes time to construct a search that will get you what you want. So there are different ways to conduct exploratory searches, and I'm going to do a demo briefly. after I run through these. So one way is to conduct very basic searches and look at relevant citations. You can examine terminology in titles, abstracts, author-supplied keywords, other parts of the record to identify synonyms that you might want to use in your search. You can look at other subject headings of articles that are really relevant. For example, PubMed uses subject terms, and those subject terms in PubMed are called mesh. In other databases, they're called something else. You can look at related citations in records. You can look for review articles. And like I said, you can look at pre-existing search strategies, and you can citation track. And by citation tracking, I mean you can look to see who has cited the article since it has been published to find more recent relevant articles. So what I want to do is I want to jump into PubMed to show you how I would conduct an exploratory search. So I'm going to jump out of the presentation. Okay. So the first thing that I want to mention to you, and this is the same in any database that you, any subscription database that you may go into, in addition to PubMed, which is free to anyone in the world, you want to log in. I'm logged in, so that's why I see this person, this image here. You want to log in because it will allow you to save searches and set up alerts. And we'll get to that later, but I just want to tell you that you can do that. It's free, and you'll have that with you in PubMed wherever you go. So I'm going to do a search on telemedicine and health disparities, and imagining that I'm just starting out on trying to understand that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a couple of synonyms here. So telehealth or telemedicine, and I think PubMed has it now that I need to put these terms in capital letters. So I think in terms of concept blocks. So we have the concept block of telemedicine, and we have the concept block of disparities. So I'm going to put hard to talk and type at the same time. I'm going to put this very, very basic search in there. So as you notice, and you may be doing this already, but I put the different concept blocks in parentheses because I need to tell PubMed the order in which to perform this search. So this is familiar from algebra probably, but that's what we need to do. So then I'm going to click search, and I'm going to point out the ways that I would start exploring on this topic. Actually, I'm going to clear filters. I was playing with this before, so that's why there were filters. So I did this very basic search, and the goal is not to have you look through 1,500 results. Your goal right now is to help prepare you for creating a structured search later on, and we'll get to that. So one thing I would say is you want to go up to sorted by, and you want to be sure that your display options are set up to best match. And that way, PubMed will look for citations that have more of your words in them in the title and abstract, and your best results will come to the top. What you can also do is you can scroll down and you can see what articles might be of interest. So for example, I'm going to open this one, addressing health disparities in rural communities. And we're looking at words in the title and the abstract that we could use that might help us when we create our final search. So you look in the title, you look in the abstract. Sometimes there are author-supplied keywords. I'm going to scroll down. And I want to show you that you also want to look in the medical subject headings. The medical subject headings are they're called controlled vocabulary. It's the tagging that PubMed uses to describe the document at hand. So this is a set language. So healthcare disparities is here, and we also see telemedicine. So as you go along in looking at items that are relevant, what I would suggest is looking for terms that you can use later on. What you can also do to help you with finding relevant items is you could filter to review articles. So you can choose review articles, and that way you can see who's already conducted reviews on your topic. I'm actually going to go back to filters, and I'm also going to choose to find systematic reviews. So if you have a big topic and you're interested in getting the lay of the land in terms of who's written reviews, this can be a good way to do it. So that is one way to conduct an exploratory search. I'm going to go back to the presentation. I want to just mention here that you can, I've mentioned the pre-existing search methodologies a couple of times, and you can get those through looking at reviews. As I mentioned, you can filter down in PubMed, and you can see in some of the more structured and systematic reviews, they will have their search methodology published. But here are some other places you can go to get ideas for search strategies. I look at search strategies all the time. You don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. So you could go into Cochrane database and you could look at a systematic review on an area of interest, and you can see how they searched to get ideas. And you can tweak it, and you can always give them credit, but looking to other reviews to get ideas can be really helpful. And here's an example of that citation tracking I was talking about. So this is an image from the database Scopus, which is a massive interdisciplinary database. I took one of the articles that I found, The Effects of Telemedicine on Racial and Ethnic Disparities. This was published in 2016, and we can see that it's been cited 14 times since 2016. So if you're writing on this topic, you might want to look at those 14 articles to see if there's something recent and relevant, or if one of those articles is a review article. So you can use PubMed and Scopus in conjunction with each other while you're in this exploratory phase before you set up your structured search. Okay, so creating your structured searches. Here's a little bit of detail here. So you want to start with a searchable question. If you have a question that says, you know, what telehealth interventions are out there? That's pretty broad. You know, you want it to be searchable. So this question, you know, how do telehealth interventions reduce health disparities? That's something that can be searched. So again, getting back to identifying main concepts and combining with what's called our Boolean operators, you think of different synonyms for the first concept, law of telemedicine, and you think of synonyms for the second one, disparities. And again, that exploratory searching will help you determine what synonyms that you want to use. You don't need to sit down and think of those synonyms ahead of time. In addition to thinking of synonyms, you want to combine medical subject headings mesh with keywords. So again, the medical subject headings are, it's like PubMed's thesaurus. It's a controlled vocabulary. And even though I am saying you need to use MeSH, you're really using the control vocabulary of the database at hand. And in PubMed, and it happens to be MeSH. And in another database, it might be called something else. So just keep that in mind. And if you look on the right, you can see that medical subject headings are hierarchical. So if I were to choose the term telemedicine, which you see on the right, it will scoop up everything underneath it. It will scoop up everything that's tagged with remote consultation, for example, or telepathology. PubMed automatically does something called exploding. So when you choose telemedicine, it automatically will explode the MeSH term, and it will pick everything up underneath it. You can choose not to explode. I'm not going to get into that now, but in general, if you choose telemedicine and you don't adjust any settings, then it will scoop up those other topics. And it takes several weeks for articles to be indexed in PubMed. You can, or as you should also in a structured search, you want to use the medical subject headings, but you also want to use keywords that might appear in the title or the abstract, the author supplied keywords, or other parts of the record. And you might wonder, why do I need both? Why do I need to combine these medical subject headings or other controlled vocabulary with keywords? You want to do that because you're covering your bases in terms of what you will retrieve. The controlled vocabulary is helpful because you're scooping up everything at once that's tagged that way, but indexing isn't perfect, and it takes several weeks for items to be indexed, so you would miss recent relevant items. And using the keywords, you're using terms that people searching might use or that authors are using. So you're increasing your chances of retrieving what you want by using both. Another aspect of advanced searching is you want to take advantage of features such as phrase searching, where you put something in quotes, or truncation, where you put an asterisk. Again, that's for PubMed. Or proximity searching. Some of the databases have proximity searching, where you can say, I want this word, remote, to be within 3 words of the word consultation. Now, PubMed does not have that feature, but Medline through Ovid does have that feature. So if you're interested in using Medline, not through the PubMed interface, but through the Ovid vendor interface, you can use that feature. So the takeaway with this slide is that the syntax, the features of the database are database dependent. So I can use truncation with an asterisk in PubMed, but the symbol might be different in another database. So this is an example of what a structured search would look like in PubMed. So you have terms that you're saying to PubMed, look in the title and the abstract, but you're also saying, look for this term in the medical subject heading. So you combine this concept block with this one. So I'm going to show you how to construct in PubMed this type of structured search. But does anyone have any questions before I move on to that detail? Okay, so I'm going to go into PubMed and I'm going to do a demo. I'm going to clear what I did before. I'm going to go down and I'm just going to delete this history to keep it looking cleaner. And this is the advanced search. And you get here in PubMed just by going to PubMed. Let's see, will it bring me back to the main screen? So if you're on the main PubMed and you go to the advanced search, it will bring you there. One thing I want to say about PubMed, and you all may know this already, but those new to the university may not. In PubMed, when you're going to PubMed, you want to go through the library's authenticated link. If you don't go to the library link and you just type in pubmed.gov and you're at home, it won't authenticate you to the full text, and it will ask you to pay for something. And you never want to pay for anything as part of U of M in terms of this content. It's available to you from our subscription. So we're at the point where I'm going to show you how you would search for each concept block, and then you would combine them. And it's detail work, and it feels very deliberate, but this is the way that you can approach any database that you're going into. Not Google Scholar, because they don't have that capability, but conceptually, it's the same in Scopus. It would be the same in Embase or Web of Science. So let's start with the telemedicine search. I won't put in every term, but I'll put in a couple of terms to give you an example. So through our exploratory searching, we saw that the medical subject term for telehealth is telemedicine. So the mesh term, again, is a control vocabulary. It has to be that exact term if I'm searching in that field. So telemedicine, I'm going to add it to this query box here. But then I also know through my exploratory searches that I want to use other synonyms. So I'm going to use telehealth or telemedicine. And I'm using telemedicine in the title and the abstract because it may not be tagged yet with that subject heading. And then I'm going to put remote consultation with an asterisk so that I get remote consultations also. So I'm going to add those with or, because I want to tell PubMed, look for this term or this term or this term. So then I'm going to search. And then I'm going to go back to my workspace, the advanced workspace, and I'm going to build the other concept block. So I'm going to say the mesh term that we saw for disparities was healthcare disparities. I'm going to add that. But again, I want to say PubMed, look in the title and the abstract for disparities or inequity. And that will pick up the different word endings. And I'll add that with or. And then I search that concept block. I'm going to go back to my advanced search builder, my workspace, and I see them both here. And that's the point where I combine them. So the action that I take is to add that to the query. And I add that to the query with and then I'm going to search them. And that combines those concept blocks. So that process is, it's the building block of creating structured searches. So I'm going to go back to my advanced search and say, for example, if you are doing a formal systematic review or close to it and you're looking for as much as possible, then you would really want to add every single possible synonym for both of those concept blocks. If you're doing a narrative review and you don't need to be as extensive but want to get an understanding of what's out there, you don't have to put in as many synonyms. The reason why we recommend breaking down the search into different concept blocks is because it's easier to save each concept block separately and you can run them later. So I was talking to you earlier about saving your searches in PubMed through logging in. What you can do is you can, under Actions, you can click these three dots, and oh, it's not allowing me to do that. So maybe that isn't available right now. Okay, so maybe saving the search isn't possible at the moment. This has changed recently. Let me see something here. I'm going to click Create Alert. Okay, so they're calling it Create Alert, but this really will save my search. So Apologize for that. So just say I want to save this concept block. I could call it telehealth. And right now, I don't want updates of new email results because this is just one block. And then I can save it. And then what it will do is if I ever want to run this search again, I can go up into my workspace and I can run the search. So it's easier to have discrete search blocks to edit than to edit it all at once. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. And before I go on, and we're getting close to actually 3 o'clock, does anyone have any questions about that detail of constructing those searches? Okay, so again, that approach, the building block of creating structured searches, if you are looking to be comprehensive or if you are looking to go beyond PubMed, you can translate your search into other databases. For most of your topics, Medline will be your core database. And just to clarify any confusion, because I realize I've been using both terms, the core component of PubMed is Medline. So you can think of PubMed like the interface for Medline. So it contains Medline and a little bit more. But Medline is also offered through the vendor Ovid. So you could do that core search and then you translate it into other databases. It makes it a more efficient approach than trying to set up all different database searches at once. And these are just a few examples of databases for you. It will really depend on the topic of your search. So documenting your process and being transparent. No matter what type of review you're doing, it can be useful to track your process. On the right, you'll see an image from a systematic review. So this type of flow chart, this diagram, is a requirement of that methodology. So you may not need to do for the review that you're working on this detailed of a flow chart, but you do want to track what you're doing for current and future use. You may need it for publishing later, or you may need it in terms of handing off your project to someone else. So the type of transparency will depend on your project. But it can be helpful to track the resources you searched, the date you searched, any filters you had, what your inclusion, exclusion criteria were, and anything else about the screening process. Okay, so I'm going to quickly talk about resource selection. All of you, some of you may be familiar with Topman. If you hit the Explore link on the top right, you will get to Library Search, and you can also get to these different research guides. There is a research guide on any area that you're interested in. If you're focused on mental health, there's a psychology guide. If you're interested in different aspects of health services research or policy, there are guides for that. So those are just jumping off points for you for being directed to some of the best databases available to you so that you're not spinning your wheels knowing where to go first. Again, there are many, many different databases. As I said, I think for many of your topics, Medline, either through PubMed or through the vendor Ovid. If you're looking for peer-reviewed content, would be a good first stop for you. But it really, your secondary databases would depend on your specific area of interest in the project. I do have some additional resources here for you to look at. This is a fantastic book by Andrew Booth and others. If you want a book on the topic, if you are interested in taking an online course, my colleagues and I have put together an advanced literature searching course for free that you can join and take different parts of it. There's also a briefer article by Andrew Booth that talks about different review types. And I did want to put in here a link to grade literature searching because I know in the acute care research unit, for many of your topics, looking into that grade literature, meaning the Research Institute reports, think tanks, looking at that content beyond the peer-reviewed content can be very important to your literature base. So I wanted to be sure to put that in there, even though there really isn't time to go through that. I want to acknowledge my incredible colleagues who contributed to the content of this session. And I just want to thank you for your time. I know we have a lot going on. It's a challenging time at the moment. So I really look forward to working with you. I've loved working with Sydney and others in the unit. So please be in touch with me at any time. And I realize we have a couple minutes. I can stay on for questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Judy. As always, that was amazing. We can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and to, sit with us and provide this very comprehensive training. So thank you as well.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I learn something new from you every time we talk.
Well, I learn something from you all too every time because, there'll be a search and I think, oh yeah, I'll find that. And I'm like, oh, so yeah, there's always something I learn too. So I appreciate it.
Yes. So Hannah or Manuel Wilson, do you guys have any questions?
I currently do not have any questions, but this was really insightful. This semester, I've gotten to use PubMed a bit more, especially through my animal physiology classes. But it's great, learning a bit more in depth. So thank you, so much, because now I know, a lot more in depth and a bunch of different other resources I can use.
Good. That's great. And, anytime, feel free. I should also say that if I don't have the answer, there's a tremendous hive mind at the library. And so I can tap into my colleagues and I can always find someone that can help you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And Dr. Tashuda left a message for you as well, Judy. He says, thank you, Judith, for this talk. Very helpful. He had to jump off to another meeting.
Great. Well, thank you, Sydney.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.
You too.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Judy. Bye-bye.
Bye, Wilson.